Guys, let's be honest. Saving money isn't really that hard. The hard part comes once your savings is in a savings account and not spending it, right? Just leaving that money sitting there. That's when it gets really difficult. That's the most difficult part about savings. I've been there. I know what you're going through. You got a big pile of savings. You got something fun that you want to purchase. You got the money to do it, but how do you keep yourself from doing it? Well, in this video, I'm going to share a few of the tips, and these are really the only tips that I've ever found to work in my life, and I really hope that they'll have the same benefit for you. Let's get to it. All right, tip number one, and that's make it inconvenient to spend your savings. This is a preventative tactic that it's worked wonders in my life and my wife's financial life. And essentially what making it inconvenient means is take your savings and move it to a separate bank than your checking account. Go open a savings account at a completely different bank and put all your savings in there. Don't leave any savings in the savings account that you have with your bank that you have your checking account. Maybe you leave like $100 in there, just because some banks, if you have a savings and a checking, they will, your accounts will be free if you have both of those accounts. So maybe leave $100 or whatever you have to do, but put the majority of your savings, the savings that you really want to keep long term, put it into a separate bank account at a different bank. On another note, you might even put your money into investments. If you have, let's say you have a full emergency fund and you're starting to invest, then don't just keep putting money into a savings account. Put money into an account that's more difficult to access, something like a brokerage account where you put your money in mutual funds and let your money grow, but your money is a little less liquid and a little more inconvenient to access. This will keep you from just doing an instant transfer whenever you see something shiny and want to purchase it. I know I'm that kind of person. On another note, it'll actually make you think twice about pulling money from your savings, because in the moment that you decide, hey, I think I want to pull money from savings and put it in my checking account and spend it, you're going to think, well, wait a minute, I opened this savings account to keep myself from doing that. And not only that, if I want to transfer money from this savings account, it's going to take a couple days. And in a couple days, I might not be as excited about this purchase. So I'm going to go ahead and not do it. So it prevents you from transferring your savings into your checking account in the first place. It's a phenomenal tactic. It's really probably the best thing and the easiest thing that I've ever done to keep myself from spending my savings. And I really think that if you want to prevent yourself from spending your savings, it's the first thing that you should do. All right, tip number two is something I like to call ask yourself the 5-year questions. Basically what this is, a mental process that you go through whenever you want to pull money from your savings into your checking account and spend it. You ask yourself things like, am I going to be happy that I did this 5 years from now? Am I even going to remember doing this 5 years from now? Is this purchase something that is so meaningful that 5 years from now, I'm going to remember it? Let's say you're going to spend money on something that costs $500. 5 years from now, are you going to remember spending that $500, or is it just going to disappear into oblivion? And whatever you're spending it on, maybe it seems exciting in the moment, but 5 years from now, it's not going to matter. And if it's not going to matter in 5 years, then chances are you probably shouldn't be spending your money on it. I mean, I think about things like if you want to buy groceries right now, that's important 5 years from now because you need food to survive. So 5 years from now, you're not going to regret spending money on groceries. But if you decide, hey, I'm going to go spend $500 on a new gaming console or something like that, on a new computer that I don't need, or maybe a smartphone that I don't really need because my smartphone works just fine right now, but I just want to upgrade for the sake of upgrading. 5 years from now, you're going to look back and probably regret that, or maybe not even remember it. And if it's not meaningful enough to remember, then you probably shouldn't do it. All right, tip number 3 is to weigh it against the long-term value of the money you're thinking of spending. So if you're thinking about pulling $500 from your savings account to spend it on something that's not in your budget or impulsive or whatever, and you take that money and rather than spending it, you invest it and just leave it there and let it sit for 35 years, right? If you weigh the $500 purchase against 35 years of growth, and let's say the growth is like 9%, which is essentially like the S&P 500 growth over the course of time, that $500 would turn into something like 10,000 plus. It would be like, I don't know, like $10,200 over the course of 35 or 40 years. So think about this. Every time you plan to spend $500 or you pull money from your savings to spend $500, you are costing yourself $10,000 worth of retirement money in your future 35 years from now. That could be a couple months worth of living expenses at that point in time, especially if you don't have a mortgage or anything like that. You could be costing yourself multiple months of living expenses. So when you start to think about your spending, and in particular, pulling money from savings in order to spend it, when you start thinking about that over the course of the long-term value of that money had you invested it instead, it'll really start to put things into perspective when you think about pulling money from savings to spend it. As a side note for this tip, one of the things that I really highly recommend, and this is something that I do, is download a compound interest calculator app on your phone so that every time you're thinking about pulling money from your savings or just thinking about making a purchase that maybe isn't in your budget or something like that, you can enter the amount of money into the compound interest calculator. I recommend putting something like 9 or 10% because that's what, like I said, that's kind of a good benchmark over the course of time as far as interest goes. And no additional monthly contributions, and just see what that'll grow to over the course of 35, maybe 40 years, depending on how old you are. And really weigh each purchase against the long-term value of that money. This is something that I have done, and it has really, really benefited my financial life in a lot of ways, but in particular, it almost always keeps me from pulling money from spending. Actually, to be quite honest, ever since downloading a compound interest calculator on my phone, I have never pulled money from savings. The me 5 years ago would never believe that, but it's the truth. All right, number 4. And this might sound a little in your face, but if you're spending your savings, if you constantly find yourself dipping into your savings, you might just need to set more compelling financial goals. So if your purpose for saving money is just to save money, you're probably going to spend that money every time something cool comes along, because saving money for the sake of saving money is kind of boring. Yes, there are things like an emergency fund that you need to have in order to protect your financial future, and saving an emergency fund, I'll be honest, isn't the most fun thing. It's nice to have, but it's not so much fun to save. So yes, there are things that are a little bit boring in terms of, financial goals, but there are other financial goals that you should set for yourself that should inspire you more to save than to spend your money. For instance, if you have a dream of traveling the world and, seeing all of your, dream locations around the world, that's a pretty compelling financial goal, but that's going to take a lot of saving, that's going to take a lot of time, and that's going to require a lot of moments where you have to decide not to pull money from savings and spend it. That's a compelling reason. For me, it's eventually I want to own my own giant wood shop that I can just go and have a bunch of power tools and all the tools that I've ever, wanted to purchase. And one day I'll be able to purchase those. But right now I have to continue to think about that as my future in order to keep myself from spending my savings. So come up with a more compelling savings goal than you have, something that in the moment when you're thinking about spending your savings will be more powerful than your desire to purchase something that's shiny and that's not in your budget. All right, tip number 5, and this is to identify and avoid your spending triggers. Now, this is a really big one that I think everybody should practice. Everybody should go through this process because spending triggers are different for everybody. For me, it's walking into the power tool section at Home Depot, because every time I walk in there, chances are I'm going to walk out with some kind of power tool that I didn't need and that didn't fit into our budget and that my wife is not going to be happy with me about. But no, in all seriousness, everybody's spending triggers are a little bit different. For you, it might be something like dining out at restaurants on your way home to work. Maybe it's a fast food restaurant. Maybe it's some kind of retail store. Maybe it's online shopping. Whatever your spending triggers are, it's important that you identify them so that you can figure out a way to avoid them. Because if you don't have a plan to avoid the potential reasons that you would pull money from savings, then you're always going to be fighting them in the moment. But if you can figure out a way to avoid them or overcome them, conquer them, whatever you want to call it, before they happen, then you're going to be much more likely to avoid pulling money from your savings in order to spend it. All right, so there you have it. 5 tips that'll help you stop spending your savings. If you like this video, be sure to hit that subscribe button. And if you want more financial inspiration, go ahead and watch a couple of these other videos.